Hey, I'm Jason, and in this video, I'm going to answer the question, do you need a zoom lens or prime lens for bird photography? Which of these is better, a zoom lens or a prime lens? So, prime lenses have three advantages over zoom lenses for bird photography. First of all, and perhaps most importantly, prime lenses are sharper. And well, in modern lens design, zoom-ins and primes are pretty close. For bird photography, when you get to those very long focal lengths like 400, 500 millimeters, and 600 millimeters, you're going to find that the sharpness difference between zoom lenses and prime lenses actually do make a little bit of a difference. The second advantage of a prime lens is that it's typically faster, has a brighter maximum aperture. And that also makes a big difference because in bird photography, there's never enough light. And because of that aperture, you also get advantage number 3, which is that zoom lenses are slower to focus than prime lenses. So prime lenses are faster, you can acquire focus faster, and that means you may or probably will get a higher hit rate when you're taking pictures of birds. But do these differences matter in bird photography, and when do they matter? So I'm going to explain that in this video. Now, I like to break up bird photography scenarios into 4 separate cases depending on how close I am to the bird. And depending on which case you're in, that will actually determine whether a prime lens will have an advantage over a zoom lens and what kind of advantage you're actually going to get. So I'm going to start with scenario number 1. When you're very close to the bird, I call this level 1. When you're very close to the bird, you can get the whole bird in the frame. And I'm going to show that on the screen now. So you can see we have a small passerine bird on the screen and it fills the entire frame. This is uncropped. And when you're in a case like this is what I call level 1, when you're so close to the bird that you don't need to crop at all. And in a case like this, you can see, if I zoom in a little bit, you can see that the feather detail is very apparent. You can see a lot of feather detail, sometimes even the detail of the feathers around the eye, which are very small. In this level 1 case, the difference between a prime lens and a zoom lens in terms of sharpness is going to be very small. You're not going to notice a lot of difference between the prime lens and the zoom lens because you're just so close. Even the weaker sharpness, the weaker resolving power of the zoom lens is not going to be very apparent. So in cases like this, you're not going to gain a lot of advantage in terms of sharpness if you get a prime versus a zoom. Now, you may still have some advantages out of a prime lens in a situation like this because prime lenses typically have faster apertures, like I said. So that means you're going to get more light, that means less noise, and your lens will focus faster. So you'll probably have a higher hit rate and shots with less noise and more background blur as well because of that faster aperture. But in terms of sharpness, a zoom lens and a prime lens will perform very similarly in this situation. And also because the bird is so close, even though zoom lenses have narrower apertures, you're probably not going to notice a huge difference in the amount of background blur you have just because the background will be so blown out. The next situation is what I call level 2. Level 2 is when you have the bird a little bit farther away. Let's say it's a small passerine bird, and you have to crop a little bit. Not a lot, maybe between 1 and 1.4 times crop. So not a very large crop. You do have to crop a little bit, but the bird is still fairly close. And I've got an example for you right now. Here I have this bird, and you can see that it's a little farther away than the bird in level 1. This is a level 2 scenario. See, I have to crop a little bit. So this is the uncropped shot, and I'm going to just crop a little bit, and the final shot looks like this. So with this shot, the bird is still quite close, and you can see when I zoom in to 100%, you can still see a lot of feather detail. And in this situation, I think still the sharpness difference between a prime lens and a zoom lens won't be great. You won't be able to notice a huge difference, but now you'll start to notice a little bit of difference between a prime lens and a zoom lens. The prime lens will resolve a little bit more feather detail. You're going to get a little bit more of those very small feathers showing up as individual strands versus a little bit of a mess with the zoom lens. At normal viewing distances, you probably won't be able to tell the difference between the two, but I do think that at this distance, the zoom lens will start to show a little bit of its weakness in terms of sharpness. And again, because zoom lenses often have narrower apertures, especially to the higher end primes, the amount of noise will also start to obscure the detail a little bit more. So those two factors will kind of come into play, and you're seeing a little bit of sharpness difference. But with careful sharpening, a zoom lens at this distance will still give very good results. Okay, now we come to a different situation, level 3. Now, level 3 is when you're really going to start to notice the difference between a prime lens and a zoom lens. Level 3 is when you have to crop a little more significantly to get the bird in the frame. You want to crop a little more significantly. Or you're printing very large, you'll also notice a difference in this case. So a level 3 scenario is when you have to crop a lot. Probably a little bit more than 1.4 times, maybe up to 2 times, and you want to still get some detail on your subject. This is a situation where the differences in sharpness between a prime lens and a zoom lens are going to become apparent. And I'm talking the difference between a lens like the Nikon 180 to 600 millimeter lens for Z-mount versus something like the 600 millimeter PF lens. Those two lenses, you're going to notice a big difference in this scenario. So let's see what this scenario looks like. Here you can see on screen that the bird is fairly far away. This is the uncropped shot, and here's a crop I made. You can crop a bit more, but basically this is maximum amount of cropping I'll want to do. So when the bird is this far away, you're absolutely going to notice the difference between a prime lens and a zoom lens. And here, when I zoom in, you can still see some feather detail, but even with the prime lens that I'm using, I'm losing a little bit of feather detail here. Not too much, but you can still see some detail on the bird, but the detail is starting to lose its definition. But when the photo is cropped like this, the detail is still sufficient to give the appearance that there's still a fair amount of detail on the bird. Now, even if you're not cropping too much, because your mind expects detail on the bird, you are going to notice a lack of sharpness with a zoom lens just because even that little bit of detail is going to start to fade away if you're using a zoom lens. So it's situations like this where a zoom lens starts to show its weaknesses, and the zoom lens might perform sufficiently poorly so that you might not get the shot, or the shot might not be to your liking. So again, in this level 3 scenario, I would recommend that if you're getting into a lot of scenarios like this, that's where a zoom lens is really going to show its weaknesses, and then I really recommend getting a prime lens. If you're just shooting in level 1 and level 2 scenarios most of the time, then the difference between a prime lens and a zoom lens isn't going to matter very much. But if you want to get these shots, and if you happen to come across a scenario where there's a rare bird in a situation, a good photographic situation, then a prime lens is really going to help you out in this kind of scenario. Okay, the final scenario is what I call level 4. It's when you're very far away from the bird. There's not really a chance of a portrait style shot. You're more going for something environmental. You're going for an environmental shot of a bird. It's very far away, and you can see a lot of its surroundings in the photo. And this is a situation where you're really going to notice the difference between a prime lens and a zoom lens. So let's take a look at the scenario on screen. Here I have a cactus wren on top of a cactus. And I really like this shot, and it's clearly an environmental shot because the bird is so far away that I don't really want to crop a lot to get into the bird. There's not much point in cropping a lot in this case, but it does illustrate the differences between a prime lens and a zoom lens. If I crop into 1:1, you can actually see a fair amount of detail on this bird. You can no longer see some small feather detail that you would see up close, but the detail is sufficient so that when I'm looking at the photo as a whole, the bird looks to be very sharp on screen. And this is the kind of scenario where if you're printing very large or you're displaying the photo on a large monitor, the difference between a prime lens and a zoom lens is very apparent because your mind is, again, it's going to expect a lot of feather detail on the bird. And birds have such nice detail that if you don't see that detail, you're going to notice it very quickly. Now, you can still take shots like this with a zoom lens, but you will not get the same level of definition and the same appearance. You won't be able to hide the deficiencies of the zoom lens with a shot like this as well as you will with a prime lens. I've shot several shots like this with zoom lenses, and I can tell you that you cannot get the same level of definition and smoothness with a zoom lens as you would with a prime lens. So this is a somewhat technical shot that really benefits from using a prime lens. So there you have it. The differences between prime lenses and zoom lens in 4 different scenarios: level 1, level 2, level 3, and level 4. Now, I made this video because sometimes zoom lenses do look very sharp in certain sample shots, and that's because you're under ideal conditions. But when you're facing a less than ideal condition, when the light is lower, when the bird is a little farther away and you need to crop, or when the bird is moving very quickly, it's low light and you need to autofocus very quickly, those are the cases where a prime lens will outperform a zoom lens. Now, I'm not saying a zoom lens can't do good bird photography. You can't do good bird photography with a zoom lens. But the thing is, with a prime lens, you're going to get more bird situations. You're going to succeed more often with a prime lens compared to if you're using a zoom lens. So should you get a prime lens or a zoom lens? Well, that kind of depends. I didn't actually talk at all about the benefits of a zoom lens and that you can kind of zoom out and use different focal lengths. But with birds, I find it's very rare that I actually want to zoom out. I'm always wanting more focal length. So that's not a huge advantage in my books, and that's why I didn't talk about it. But a zoom lens, undoubtedly it's cheaper and it's more versatile in some scenarios, especially if you're doing video work. So a zoom lens is not bad, and you can certainly get 5-star shots with it. But I think if you want to maximize your chances of getting the shot every time, a prime lens still has significant advantages over zoom lenses, especially if the bird is not as close as you would like. So there you have it, prime lenses versus zoom lenses. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that helped you understand the differences between these two types of lenses in the context of bird photography. And I hope to see you again next time.